The purpose of this Headless Professor video is to talk about how to use a rhetorical device known as the analogy. Analogies are comparisons between two things. They are somewhat like examples, although they are usually not concrete instances of what we are trying to demonstrate. They come closer to being metaphors for what we are trying to demonstrate. Analogies are not proof in the form that statistics or experiments may be proof of the relationship between two variables. Perhaps the best purpose for analogies is that they enable us to reframe what we are talking about, to present it in a new light, perhaps one more favorable to the case being advocated. In this sense, do not view analogies as a substitute for formal proof. Think of them as a useful supplement. Let's take an example of nationalized single-payer health care. How might we use analogies to support the affirmative case for a plan of national health care? Well, one issue we would have to look at would be the issue of whether or not there is a need for such a program. And one analogy that would suggest there might be a need in this area is to look at some other area of public concern, like education. In education, the primary funding is public. The government owns, funds, operates, and supervises the majority of schools in the United States. Now, another issue, of course, is why can't we have a mere modification of the status quo instead of having a radical change such as nationalized health care? Once again, an analogy might help us understand why that might be necessary by reframing the issue. Here we could use the metaphor. If you're going to jump over a great chasm, you can't do that in a lot of little steps. You've got to have one big jump. Now, whenever a radical new plan is being offered, there is the question of workability. Once again, analogies can help us see how this might be done. We could say that other segments of the U.S. population are being covered today. There are patient populations such as the elderly covered by Medicare, the poor covered by Medicaid, military veterans covered by the Veterans Administration system. Another issue is whether or not the plan of nationalized health care would actually meet all these needs. The analogy that we might turn to is the experience of other countries, such as the United Kingdom, Canada, or members of the European community. All have some form of nationalized health care using a single-payer format, and they find that it can meet the vast majority of needs of their population. None of these countries has decided to abolish their national health care system and go back to a system of private insurance. What about the question of disadvantages of such a program? It is often suggested that government might stifle innovation in healthcare. Once again, we can turn to analogies to see how we might find a way out of this argument. There are other government programs that have clearly been associated with innovation. We could go back to World War II and look at the Manhattan Project, which developed atomic weapons in a very short period of time, or the space program, which put a man on the moon in about a decade back in the 1960s. So remember that the use of analogies might be a very appropriate rhetorical device, but it is not science and not a substitute for scientific proof.